Thank you very much for attending today. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Transport for the North Scrutiny meeting. The first item on the agenda relates to an item that should have been held in June, but because of the election, that meeting was deferred. So the first item on today's agenda is the election of the chair and majority and minority vice chairs. And I'm going to hand over to Julie Openshaw to take this part.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So good morning, everyone. I'm Julie Openshaw, the Head of Legal with TFN. Can I ask members if you would please put forward nominations for the position of Chair?
I'd like to, I think Paul's done a great job over the last few years. I'd like to, if he's willing to, sorry, usually not loud enough voice. If he's willing to do it, continue, I would like to nominate Councillor Paul Haslam as the Chair for this next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that seconded, please?
And I'd be delighted to second that.
Thank you. Is that carried? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be able to chair these meetings for another year going forward. I think what we do on scrutiny is very valuable. And we make a difference, and that's the important part, and I think that's why we've all been elected or sought election in the past. I now have to move to a majority group vice chair. So do I have any nominations for, in fact I have a nomination for majority group vice chair, and that would be Eric. Do I have a seconder, please?
Second.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for this position? Do I have to do all in favour, or is he just stuck with it? Is everybody happy with Eric's nomination, please? Thank you. And I also have to ask for a minority vice chair. Was anybody wishing to do this? You rarely get called on, but you may. Okay, well, we'll take that offline, and I can pick that up at another stage, if that's okay. So, as I said earlier, welcome. I'm delighted to be chair. We've got 3 key items on the agenda today, of which I've allocated 30 minutes to each. I expect this meeting to finish no later than 1 o'clock, and we'll try and manage it according to that. So if any of you need to get away, you can schedule it on that. And if I do know that one person has already said that they might have to leave slightly earlier. In terms of the items on the agenda, although I don't wish to alienate any of my TFN officers, item 5 and item 6 item 6 and item 7 are particularly are the ones that we really need your involvement with. Thank you. Now, Gary, could you ask for the minutes? Is there any questions on any of the minutes?
Apologies.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Apologies, please.
Yeah, so, Chair, we've had apologies this morning from Councillors Shorrock, Boughton, Walker, Place, Prescott and Rowe.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else know of any apologies at all today? Okay, thank you. That's noted. Now, to the minutes, yes? Yeah. So, are there any questions on any of the minutes at all?
Councillors Boughton and Broughton weren't on the attendance list.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that to my attention last night. There was a technical error sort of pulling them through onto the minutes. I've now altered that, and I've also, it should have read Councillors Boughton and Bamborough, so that's also been altered on the draft minutes on the website.
I've had a chat with Gary earlier on. So I was getting mixed up that sometimes when you get an invoice, it cancels, and I wasn't able to come to that one at this meeting because I thought it was cancelled, but obviously it wasn't. So just to say sorry that I didn't attend.
Your apology is well accepted, and I appreciate the confusion. We'll try and make sure that you know whether it's an online or an in-person meeting. Thank you. On the basis of that correction, Steve, can I ask you to agree the minutes or put forward the minutes? Yeah.
Move on the list.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chair, can I just point out we just need to do declarations of interest, they may not be in, but just so that we know.
Okay, yes. Declarations of interest. Is there anything that you need to declare today? Anybody?
Oh.
Yes, Rob.
Just checking, should I declare that I'm currently a vice chair of the Public Transport Consortium? Do I need to declare that?
I don't know, but it doesn't do any harm, does it? So, you know, so
Sounds good on the CV.
it's better to be safe than sorry. But thank you for that. So the next item on the agenda is the Scrutiny Committee work, which I will ask Katie to just say a couple of words about first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. We wanted to take the opportunity to just reflect on the work of the Committee over the last year through the formal report. Transport for the North operates a scrutiny first policy, which means this committee is incredibly helpful and valuable in giving us feedback and insight to inform the papers that we then take forward to our board. There's a rhyme and reason in the way we schedule the meetings to enable us to do that, so that feedback can either be directly fed into the board paper or reported back at the board meeting, depending on the time. I think probably personally I would just reflect on the work and contribution the committee gave us last year around the strategic transport plan. I think you probably had me in front of you more times than you may have cared to have liked talking about that with you, but I think your help and insight was able to not only get us to a place where we could take the strategic transport plan for approval to the board, which we did in March, and we were pleased that they were able to adopt it and we published it, but actually some of the advice that we are working alongside in terms of how we implement that, how we make it happen as well. So I think that perspective to try and just strengthen some of the elements in that plan were much appreciated. So the report there is for noting, to reflect on the work the committee has done and taken, and of course if there are any further insights or thoughts that you've got about how we work with the committee, we'd be grateful to receive those. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I'd just like to add that this paper forms part of what audit have to do. Audit have to report on the work of this committee. A lot of what we do is dictated by what's coming up on the main board because it's a scrutiny first approach. Any comments that we do make are noted as Katie mentioned, so that they are the board note the changes that we've made and either acknowledge, and most times I don't remember a time when they've not accepted things that we've put through. Should people want to perhaps scrutinise other things that aren't perhaps coming to the board immediately, we do have the opportunity to have 2 additional meetings a year, which would be online. So should anybody wish to, or should the committee wish to investigate anything in particular, we do have that opportunity as well. But the standard is to have 4 meetings a year currently. I'll open it up to questions to the committee. Thank you.
I think wait to see what happens with financing, but the strategic transport plan depends on getting a lot of money. So there may be decisions by government which affect some of that. So just thinking of the questions in Parliament yesterday about the A66 improvements, and hints that might already be not quite on the back burner but being looked at. So I'm not sure whether at some stage there'll be issues to address there.
Anybody, anything else? I do note that HS2 Northern Leg was also talked about, not necessarily yesterday, but it has been floated. Okay, well, look, I'll move us on to the next item, which is very important. In fact, TfN are looking to help save money in our councils. So this is particularly what I would call, I've termed it the value add of Transport for the North, where they've got knowledge, training, that they can present to our councils where we might not have the in-house ability. And I am assured that it's at a discount to KPMG and other major consultancies. So I'm going to hand over to Katie to take us through this particular paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, we are seeking a steer from you today and some feedback on the paper around our priorities for business planning. It is that time of year again where we're looking ahead to the year, thinking about the funding environment that we are in, and seeking a steer. We will be seeking a steer from the board on the 16th of September, but your feedback and insight now on how those priorities are shaping up would be appreciated. Just very briefly, in terms of the paper itself, what we've sought to do is try and give a feel for the work that we've done to date, and that includes what we've called the TFN offer, which is where we've been able to make available our evidence and some of our analytical tools to MCAs and LTAs to support your local planning and work that you're doing within your localities as well. We've been quite overwhelmed with requests for support, more than 100 to date. We provided a breakdown of those within the pack. And we reckon that our estimation is that the value that we've been able to provide just through our analytical team is in the region of about £360,000 worth of savings since we launched. About what we've been working on, we've also taken an opportunity to reflect, of course, on the new context that we find ourselves within. And actually, perhaps this is where the North Strategic Transport Plan has been quite strong as a document. As we were pulling it together with all of you and other partners, we focused on how transport could enable sustainable and inclusive economic growth. So that is a plan focused on outcomes for people and places, and actually how better connectivity can facilitate growth in the economy. It can help us decarbonise our transport system, and it can actually help us create more opportunities for all by reducing transport-related social exclusion. So we hope that it is well aligned with the missions that are from our new government. And I think the final point that I just want to point to before opening up is Appendix 5 within the pack, which is really where I'm keen to get your feedback and insight this morning, which are taking on what we've done already with the Strategic Transport Plan, a focus now on how we make that a reality and what we can do, and a focus on building on what we've already put in place through the TFN offer and the capability and the capacity that we hold within the TFN executive to support all of the authorities across the North. We've set out at Appendix 5 where we think the priorities lie for the year ahead, and we would welcome your feedback on those. We've had some very helpful feedback from your officers already. We've had several conversations over the summer with the Executive Board. So those, certainly the Appendix 1, that is a summary of where TFN is at and where we hope to go, has been informed by their helpful feedback and views. And I think it's probably worth mentioning as well that we did circulate in advance of committee for information a copy of the Jürgen Meyer review, which of course was published just the week before last. That was commissioned by the Labour Party when in opposition. And I think within that there is recognition about the value of working pan-regionally and collaboration across boundaries. So we just wanted to make sure the committee had a copy of that as you consider the focus for TFN as we look to the year ahead and beyond. And I think, Chair, and I would be grateful just to get feedback and take questions and comments on the paper really to help us get this into shape ahead of talking with the board on the 16th of September. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just point out, I think it's point 8.3, which said that in the last year that TFN had saved several £100,000 from various councils. So I think this is important that we actually steer this so that it fits and it helps us get savings, because I had a meeting with in North Yorkshire yesterday where they're talking about austerity version 3. And I'm not quite sure what that looks like. So everywhere where we can make savings is going to be crucial to ensure that we maintain all our frontline services. And as Katie said, that spend actually probably generated about £3 million worth of value. So it's clearly a good opportunity. So and it's a good opportunity for you to perhaps either comment on the items that are already in Appendix 5, or perhaps add anything additional that would help you guys. So over to you. Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to sort of come in briefly to say that I think there's a lot of good news here. As you say, that there's these considerable cost savings, and really I think we should be shouting from the rooftops about that. I suspect that a lot of people will just not know much about the work of Transport for the North. But if we are to continue to be in a situation where public finances are tight, being able to demonstrate this sort of value for money is fantastic, and how we can sort of continue to have this focus on transport and challenging some of the issues that a lack of transport brings. So I think that's really good news. I was interested reading through the papers in I was sort of interested in some of the assumptions that go into our modelling. So, for instance, there's the projection, or there's an ambition that the share of journeys that would move to sustainable transport would go from 36.4% to 51%, and that there would be zero overall regional increase in car and taxi vehicle mileage going to 2045. I'm interested in what the assumptions were about population and population growth, because it does strike me that that could be, under certain assumptions, you're allowing for a lot more journeys and a lot more economic activity and whatever else. Equally, if population were to grow to a certain extent, then you might have to accept more journeys by car and taxi, for instance. So how do we make assumptions about things, particularly that far in the future, and on something which is not perhaps, it's not exactly clear where we will be in 2045?
Thank you, Councillor Salter. Though the metrics that you're referring to are right share metrics, as we call them, they're baked into the Strategic Transport Plan, which the board signed off in March. And the idea behind them was to set the ambition for how we would like to see greater use of public transport, more sustainable transport, and actually think about car usage in terms of decarbonisation ambitions. In terms of how we got to those metrics, I'm quite happy to take that offline and ask the team to provide a little bit more detail on that. What I can tell you is that we used our work around future travel scenarios, where we looked at different plausible futures of how things could pan out for the north of England in terms of transport systems, in terms of transport use. And the analysis that underpinned those allowed us to gauge what might be appropriate right share metrics. We also looked very closely at what many of the MCAs and LTAs were doing across the region as well, in terms of that level of ambition, working out that actually some metrics may be easier to achieve in perhaps more densely populated areas where perhaps there's a more ready access to public transport, balanced with perhaps some of the more rural location where there may be different or more complex challenges in some cases. So we were able to give the board some options around how they might like to set their ambition. And again, this committee were incredibly helpful in allowing us to test those with Use First before we put them forward. But there is a whole set of evidence and analysis based on those future travel scenarios, which includes population growth, that allowed us to reach those numbers. So I'd be happy to ask the team to provide you with a separate response offline on the detail, if that would be useful.
Yeah, thank you. I could just sort of say, in addition, I mean, clearly the sort of ambition for that sort of shift, modal shift, is something that I think we all very much support, and I wholeheartedly endorse. And in a sense, I'm just sort of pointing out that I want to see that radical change, but we have to bear in mind what happens if the population were to increase only, a few percent more than we project. And we've got to always be, I suppose, aware that we may have to adapt some of our projections over time. But thank you very much for that.
I would just add, you've made a very, very valid point, Councillor, and one of the pieces of work that we've launched alongside the Strategic Transport Plan is a monitoring and evaluation framework to track our progress against those ambitions. And we're doing that through a live dashboard that is on our website, and that means that annually we're able to check and challenge where we are against those. And as you rightly said, if those contexts, those external factors change, to say, do we need to do things differently, do something extra, take things in a different direction, so that as a collective, TFN members are able to consider where our performance is against the STP and where we might need to adjust things based on context changing, which, as we know, has changed quite rapidly in certain areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I bring you in, Councillor Davison, just to add to this, we've just been looking at the proposed changes to housing, and at the moment the proposed change into housing would mean that we would get a 306% increase in North Yorkshire to where we are right now, which in real terms is a shift to about 80,000 houses being built over the next 20 years. But we equally have a counterbalancing situation where our forecast for jobs in North Yorkshire over the next 20 years, the jobs growth is around 10,000. So there's a bit of an inequality. But I think these are new numbers that perhaps will get baked into this at some point when there's an agreement on what the new housing targets are. But I do think you raise a very valid point, and it is quite fluid. Over to you, John.
Well, funnily enough, my topic was the tearing up of the planning legislation that we've been used to as authorities, and as a member of the Planning Committee for North Lincolnshire, one of the things we fight off is speculative developments on greenfield land, which are densely packed, as they are now, housing, with no infrastructure. So I think what concerns me, and where we might be able to influence some of the policy making as this new policy to tell us all to build, 300% more houses for somebody, is what about the public transport? Because all of the estates that we see are all utterly car reliant. They're away from shops. They very rarely include any plans for facilities like doctors' surgeries, etc., etc. Obviously, developers are just interested in profit. This is going to be great news for them. So I think, in terms of me, and it ties in with population growth, because the way it's heading is that this population growth will be car reliant, especially in rural areas. Obviously, densely populated urban areas where there's a good infrastructure for buses, you haven't got a problem. But in urban areas like North Lincolnshire, where we really struggle to provide any bus services at all without vast subsidy and on demand, it's a great concern to me. So I think, in terms of trying to steer policy when these great estates are going to come forward, that it's mandated that they include the necessary public transport links, that people can therefore leave the car at home.
It's a very, very relevant topic for us, I think, in terms of particularly transport-related social exclusion as well, actually having the choices and options available. So, Councillor Davison, perhaps I can take that away to feed into the priorities and the feedback to the board to see where they may like us to go on that, because it is an emerging policy and changing the way we do things, and to actually think about how we plan it in a sustainable way. So actually those choices are there about how we move from places and can access jobs and services, I think is vitally important, and at the heart of that inclusive and sustainable transport system that we've seen as integral to the strategic transport plan. So, thank you.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you. Yeah, my question's related in a way. I noticed on the Transport for the North priorities on a page, there's a section about public transport in rural areas and social inclusion. And I don't really see that reflected in the work that is set out for next year. So I was wondering, or this year as it is now, I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on how you see rural. I know it's challenging. Rural transport is definitely challenging, but Cumberland has very many very small villages. They're not even normal sized villages, very many very small villages, where having one car and probably two is an absolute necessity, and we've got to do something to change that. So, can we bring forward the sort of rural public transport issue to higher up the agenda, please? Thank you.
Yeah, and just piggybacking on both those last comments, one of the things that I've asked, that because North Yorkshire's got is developing a new local plan currently, is that every housing estate should not only just have access for the car, but obviously active travel, and actually there's a large number of what I call housing estates where you can't even turn a bus round in, and if they're not built to accept that infrastructure, then that's an additional barrier to actually rolling out buses, because I think that a lot of the rural transport is going to be around the bus, and we have an item later on about how we can all use Matt's expertise to buy buses. So I do think that it's also important that when you go back and you talk about local plans, that you try and integrate other parts, other policies, so that it's not it doesn't get siloed, which is a danger.
Just a PS to that, really, because one of the consistent problems with housing applications planning is proximity to public transport, and we've had some where, to declare the interest again, as the non-executive director of Warrington's bus company, you know, I've put party to confidential information, and it says on, you know, there's a bus service, and you think we might be closing that in 6 months' time. And this is what you do get. You get new housing estates with the availability of public transport, one of the planning issues, and then 6 months, 12 months later, there's no buses.
Can I go to Rod first and then come back to you in a second?
Well, just briefly, Chair, this is something that's been happening for quite some time now, because villages in rural areas or urban areas, the centre's built up, so the new estates are going on green fields a mile or two out of the centre. And I'm just going to mention a case about a few years ago now, when there was this planning application put in, which is about 2 miles from where the shops were, no bus service within a reasonable distance, and it was turned down on the fact that there was no bus service nearby for this to service this estate. It went to appeal, and the developer won. And this is some years ago. So what's going to happen with planning when planning rules are going to be relaxed, as they say they are? And I think we've got very little chance, really. But still, let's hope for the best.
Do you want to say anything on that, Katie?
I think what I'm picking up around the room is an ask for TfN to continue to make rural connectivity a priority. Our work thus far has been very much about assembling the evidence and the analysis to help us better make the case for investment in rural connectivity, and we've worked with your officers over the last couple of years to build that. Interestingly enough, we are over the autumn expecting to publish some analysis we've done about actually how transport planning accounts for rural areas and understanding rural areas and complexity when we're thinking about project appraisal, for example, and how potentially we can get under the skin of some of the metrics. For example, rather than grouping ages 16 to 64 as one, how we can potentially look at that a little bit more closely and what some of the breakup might be of that group to better make the case. So I think what I'm hearing is to keep rural connectivity as a priority, and we'll be able to take that away, share that with the board, and then work with your officers to develop what would be helpful in terms of that cross-border working where it's more efficient and effective to do so. So thank you.
Sorry, Colin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Conscious that I'm a new member of the committee, this is my first meeting, so kind of feeling my way on a lot of this. One of the things that struck me as I read the review report that had been circulated subsequently, which is very interesting, the Real and Urban Review, and just picking up on some of the comments made earlier about where we might be in terms of funding. I was struck that there was a reference in that review to public-private partnership, and I think there's there's a very interesting discussion here about, you know, if we are going to fund all of our ambitions, where is the money going to come from, and how much of it is going to come from sources like public-private partnership. I didn't see in the papers any particular reference to looking at the options there, but I wonder if there's something that we need to be doing to make sure that where there is public-private partnership options being explored, that we get it right, that we learn from where it maybe hasn't worked in the past through PFI. I have had my knuckles rapped for being scathing about PFI, and I've been told it's okay, it works sometimes in some places, and that's fair enough. But I think that there's something there about making sure that we get public-private partnership right, and whether there's anything in particular in the context of the North that we need to be thinking about where the money comes from, what they're looking for from it that can be of particular benefit or use to the North. So that was something that I wasn't picking up in terms of that business plan in there, but I think that could be quite an important thing to look at whenever we're saying there isn't a tremendous amount of money going around to fund the ambitions that we all have.
It's a very, very important point, and one of the debates that we had around the strategic transport plan was about creating certainty around policy and certainty around an investment pipeline and doing that over a longer period. And I think we actually talked about 5 + 5 years in the STP. The reason being that when you've got that certainty, and a lot of private companies have said this to us, as I'm sure they will have to you as well, then they've got opportunities to potentially invest. So I think one of the things we've mentioned it briefly about the ability for TFN as a member organisation here to support LTAs and MCAs, that there may be a role for us here to convene public and private partners. For example, I know Simon and Andrew will talk in a moment about some of the work we're doing on EVCI, which is helping identify commercial opportunities to roll out electric vehicle charging infrastructure. But I think that's a really helpful feedback, Councillor Ferguson, that actually this might be some further work where TFN could potentially support the region, and thinking about the dimension for the North and the opportunities for the North. So again, I'll take that away and feed that back to the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor John Davis.
Yeah, I meant to add last time actually, but just turning to the handcuffs that we're going to have placed on us as planning authorities in terms of large developments and this rush to build all this housing that we need. One of the things we've noted over the past few years, and it's relevant in terms of what the estates look like, these large ones, is the dreaded Section 106. Now, what we've found over the last few years, and it's more common now, I think, across the country, is that at outline planning stage, when you get these things in front of you, there's many promises to put sometimes quite a lot of millions of pounds into providing services, you know, for this new burgeoning housing. You get to reserve matters stage and suddenly they say it's unaffordable. And they have various studies done that prove that. That comes back. You are really not in a position to refuse. So we end up actually approving housing estates with nothing in them. So they've either whittled it down to nothing, or they've got a token community contribution, and that's very important really. So I think in terms of, we've heard for some time that there was supposed to be doing away with 106, coming up with another type of levy. I think it's very important now that we're going to get, you know, whether there's enough builders to build all these houses is another matter of course, but you know, I think it's important really, if we've got any powers of lobbying, to talk to central government to look at the whole 106 contribution, because, you know, otherwise, as we've said before, we're going to get vast estates with totally reliant on the car, and people, you know, they'll basically be sleeper towns, won't they?
Did you want some?
No, I think helpful clarification.
Thank you. Councillor John Healy, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's a lot, in actual fact, that's just recently come out from the various contributors in this meeting. And one of the things that I find missing within the report, it's in the body, and that is consultation with the public. It needs to be more in depth, as I feel. There's insufficiency of it. Although it is mentioned in one or two of the reports, it's certainly believed to be true that we need to be consulting with the public in the Labour Party document, which at the moment is advisory. And I believe that some of the issues that Councillor Davidson and previous speakers have raised could very well be allayed, because myself have been on planning and I've come across the self-same disappointments in the process of planning, or we can't do this, etc. And there's nothing we can do. We have no powers whatsoever as a planning authority to overturn. And I might add as well, as a comment, Chair, is that where, and I know things are changing, where public transport is concerned, you're hidebound by those who own the transport system. If they want to go to A and B, they will do, but they will leave out C and D because it's not profitable. That's the rural areas and the bus service for the kids as well. So we need to be talking to the public a lot more than we are doing. Not necessarily ourselves, but we need to be passing that on to those who are the decision makers at the end of the day. Thank you, Chair.
I've been fortunate in my career to do lots of public engagement, and I think it's incredibly valuable, and we saw that firsthand in the extensive consultation we ran around the Strategic Transport Plan, and we're continuing to build our citizens panel, and we're hoping to aim for 2,000 members this year, which is members of the public, to give us insight and evidence to inform our work. So I think as a principle, consultation with the public is vitally important. I can't comment what individual authorities are required to do, but I can assure you that we are seeking every opportunity to get those public voices into our work where it's appropriate, and to make sure that we undertake further consultation where we need to, as we pull together new evidence, new documents, etc. Because you're quite right that perspective, that lived experience, is essential to use in the work that we can then do and provide onwards in terms of advice to government, or work that we can do for MCAs and LTAs to support your decision making. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, I think it's is it Andy? I can't. Sorry, my eye. Yes, you know it's all right. It's Councillor.
Very long already. I'm just at the caveat about consulting with the public. I mean, people like parish councils will say they want public transport, they've no intention of using it. It's meant for other inferior people, not themselves. And sometimes when you get a bus service diverting, passengers can pick us by their absence, to be perfectly honest. This is a cultural thing. It's well established that a generation of people just drive with petrol heads and drive everywhere. Catch a bus, look at the timetable. I don't understand that. So we do have to overcome this cultural barrier. We have to be aware of it. To be honest, from my experience, it's getting better. Locally where I am, it's improving. More people are using what is now a better bus service. They're grasping the timetable, and people who wouldn't have dreamed of going a few miles shopping on the bus are now doing so. But it can be done. But we can't always take at face value what parish councils say they want, because they don't necessarily mean it.
Thank you very much for those comments. I think we have to get everybody to think about the questionnaires. Is when you get up in the morning, is not how do I get my car to X, but how do I get to X, and car is one of the options. So thank you for that. I'd now like to go to Councillor Firth, please.
Thank you. Great interest to the previous speakers. But quite right, rural areas, and we have many in West Yorkshire, because covered in the 5 district, are badly served. But we are hoping that by moving to the franchising model, we'll keep the core services, and subsequently with a profit, because it's all about money, we will be able to maintain and expand rural services going forward. It's not going to be tomorrow, but because we've just started on the franchising route. But the Mayor, Tracy Bravin, is very confident that this model will happen and will serve West Yorkshire well.
Thank you. Well, we are watching you with interest to learn from your mistakes, maybe. But hopefully you won't. But we are looking to learn, so thank you very much. And we're also looking to learn from Andy Burnham, who's trailblazing at the other side of the country as well. So I have one more person who wishes to speak, so Councillor Steve Parish, please.
Yeah, one was just on franchising, because of course with devolution expanding, there may be areas which are, let's say, more rural, where if you want to franchise your bus services, most of them are probably loss-making to start with, so that's going to be an issue. But looking back to section 106, I will just caution and just ask how much unspent section 106 money for public transport is just sitting there, either because the officers have never thought which company is going to run a bus, or they've never been asked. It'd be interesting to find out, if there's an exercise around the table, just how much unspent money on public transport is in there for section 106.
That's excellent. Katie, just over to you to just finish up and tell us whether you've got enough information to take away. I see you filled the book.
Yes, I'm always taking copious notes. I'm a little bit old-fashioned. I still haven't got used to OneNote on the laptop. Look, councillors, thank you so much. That is very helpful. I'm hearing really strong support for more on rural connectivity. I think there's potentially some work that the board may wish us to do to support anything they might want to do around planning and actually thinking about public transport within planning as well. And I think also just noting, I think Councillor Salter's point about actually how we keep track of that changing context around us too. And I think the other point that came through from Councillor Ferguson, just the public-private point as well. And again, if there's anything at the level of the north that might be helpful for us to consider in terms of how we make those work more successfully in the future. I won't go through every single committee, but please be assured I've noted them down, and we'll make sure that those are reflected back to the board in the priority list. But thank you very much for your contributions. That's really helped. And again, that's scrutiny first in action. So thank you, Chair.
Was Katie's summary good enough for you guys? Thank you very much. We'll now move to the next item, which in actual fact actually leads on nicely, because this I believe is really how to buy a bus. I think most of the local authorities won't have anybody in-house who's bought a bus before. And I know I'll suddenly get loads of requests saying, or loads of comments saying, yes, we have. Well, we haven't in North Yorkshire, so I'll leave it at that. So I'm going to hand over to Matt to talk about the services that he's talking of offering us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just by introduction, I'm Matt Small. I'm TFN's Head of Connected Mobility. I'm going to take the paper and report as read, but I'm going to just pick out a few key points for context as to where this has come from and sort of the thinking behind it. A number of meetings ago, some of our members of the main TFN board identified from some of the bus work we'd been doing that there could be an opportunity at the pan-regional level to support more efficiencies in the procurement of fleet, the standardisation of that approach. In response to that, the TFN executive went away to look at exploring the options with officers at your authorities, and effectively to come up with a menu of potential flavours of what that support would look like should the board collectively view it as an area of value adding activity for transport for the north. Broadly for context, it assumes, generally speaking, that we are moving to a zero emission fleet, so that is an underlining factor to it. There is an element around, is there opportunities to share existing less aged fleet across the north of England? In those conversations with authority officers, two areas of potential focus for this support across the north were identified. One is in the development of economies of scale, both in the actual procurement of the fleet, but also in the underlying specifications and configurations that might be used to enable the procurement of fleet, so standardisation of some of those supporting approaches. And then the second area is around market confidence, so the ability for authorities to have confidence that the market for the production of vehicles is able to meet the demand. Some of you may have spotted this week, I think, a report from UTG which set out the extent to which the challenge of getting a renewed fleet will be. So if we can identify and collectively as the north of England make the case for a pipeline of fleet for what needs to happen in renewal for the north, then that adds credibility and a need to challenge back to the manufacturer base to effectively meet that challenge. Where we are at the moment is this is a very emergent piece of work, so it filters off from some comments made by members, and we are looking for a steer collectively from scrutiny in terms of that scrutiny first approach and then back to board as to, one, is this an area where there is a view collectively for us to work across the north of England and collaborate more? And if so, what flavour in that tiered list of options that has been presented and worked through with officers would be the best way of approaching that? Again, to feed into some of those priorities, exercise and work for the business planning activity for the next financial year. And effectively, it's back to the collective committee here to collate views, areas of focus, areas of nuance that we might want to tease out, or whether or not this is something that we as a pan-regional authority would be able to pursue that adds actual value to you as your local authorities look to deliver various different flavours of bus reform, be it franchising, be it BSIP through partnership with your transport operators. So I think, Chair, if I can open it up to the committee for comments and views.
Thank you very much, Matt. Yeah, I think this is a very important item. I think there's something about economies of scale, definitely in this. One of the things at the moment is electric vehicles are still very expensive, whereas, but that's because everybody wants choice. They all want their own version. But it could be that if we can standardise procurement in this case. The other thing is, of course, is it allows standardisation. So, you know, for example, in North Yorkshire, we've just combined a load of district and borough councils, and our refuse collection fleet are all different. Some have cameras on, some don't, etc., etc. So this is, you know, sort of. I think it's important that you suddenly hit these challenges. So I think that's important. I think there's also something else behind this, which is how do you maintain the supply chain of maintenance and infrastructure. So, for example, if we go to Liverpool, where we've got hydrogen buses under test, etc. So how do we have the suitable infrastructure as well? So I think it has a lot of things, a lot of merit that I think would make would be bringing savings to our local authorities. Anyway, I'm going to hand over, and I believe the first person on the button was Councillor Steve Parish, please.
Thank you, Chair. Warrington is in the middle of getting 105 electric buses, and that's a complicated deal because the bus company is owned by the council, and there's been a lot of contractual issues to resolve. I can say at the outset that the idea of TfN purchasing the buses and then reselling them to constituent authorities might have all sorts of problems, because even just within Warrington it's not been an easy deal. You can have a look at our buses any time and see whether any of them would suit you, and then go to Volvo and say, can we have one of them? Or you can have one of our 105 diesel buses which are now for sale. But can I just say, in terms of the report and in terms of helping people, I'd have to say Warrington is willing, without getting too Dickensian. But in terms of the report itself, can I just point out that 6.8 actually talks about decarbonation rather than decarbonisation, but that is the only mention actually in the report that you do mean zero emission buses, and it wasn't that obvious, I didn't think. So it ought to be up front, I think, that you do mean zero emission buses.
Thank you. Over to you, Councillor Salter.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Right, yeah, I mean, I very much agree that there's a lot of potential here, and as I was reading through the report, I really, you can see as you move from option 1 through to option 4 that it's sort of options 3 and 4 that give, more scope for sort of buying power and being able to, particularly if you're dealing with a relatively small number of suppliers, being able to possibly drive prices down and sort of thrash out a kind of standards for electric and hydrogen vehicles. I think the opportunities for making the most of hydrogen as a fuel source would be very exciting. I think my big concern when sort of going through this is that across the north we've got a whole different range of devolution deals in place, and we've also got a lot of authorities that don't have a devolution deal at this point in time, and we're all at different sort of steps. And it is important that in everything we're doing at Transport for the North, that we've got a good offer for all the authorities across the North. We're not leaving areas behind. So there is a thought of what are we offering to those authorities that don't have a devolution deal in place yet, and you know, to what extent have we thought about how we're engaging with this whole different range of positions that constituent authorities are in, to make sure we are giving sort of value for money, that there is sort of the offer in place that there should be. And that strikes me as perhaps the piece of work that I'm really quite interested in hearing about, or if that could be sort of done. But yes, there's a lot of potential here. There's a lot to be you know, interested in if we can sort of flesh out some of the details.
I think if I can just pick up both of those points there. On the support from existing experienced authorities, I think under the light support option, effectively, what we'd look to do is get all of those that have been on that journey to feed into that, to develop some of the specifications. I think it's a really valuable and important point if we are progressing this piece of work, that particularly the non-devolved authorities that don't have a potential current line of sight to franchising or a structured asset management strategy aren't left behind by this. So there is a particular element of the paper that looks at how we might support standardisation in the grant funding and access to fleet under BSIPs, where an authority is looking to modernise their fleet but through an existing operator, and how you might get around some of the nuances of subsidy control that might exist around there, and potentially how those authorities could work together for those separate economies of scale to make sure there's some access to that. I think that's an area of specific nuance we would need to go into more detail, as you've suggested, but it's one that is probably significantly materially more important for those authorities as they go on that journey compared to those that might be procuring the fleet directly. So it is an area that I think we recognise would need a nuanced approach. It might be there's some filtered benefits from supporting the MCAs around standardisation of fleet, configurations, etc., that can have spillover as well.
Yeah, I think one thing I think is also that it will add certainty to the marketplace that we were looking at scale on this. So I think those are very valid points, and as I say, no one's left behind. Councillor Firth, please.
Just following your point, Chair. How many, just forgive my ignorance, but I don't know, how many bus manufacturers are in this country, and what's the volume they can actually churn out? Double deckers, for instance.
Can I just bring Steve in on this, because I think he knows the answer.
I don't think there's any British manufacturers of bus chassis that are doing vehicles. Plenty doing the coach work. But one of the major questions in the current geopolitical climate is, do you want to exclude Chinese manufactured buses? Whatever bus you get, it's going to have Chinese components, but that would be a limiting factor. And the other issue which has to be addressed if you're doing something centrally like this is, what will the arrangements be when all those buses in 8 years' time need new batteries?
I think that's fair, and one of the areas of focus is how we identify the pipeline strategically across the north of England of when, for example, fleet is ageing to a point where replacements would be needed. Again, we're getting into the detail that we might look at, but the supply chain's capacity is quite stretched, and we've seen that through the existing deployment of Zebra funding to authorities. But if we can provide clarity of as and when geographically in the north the fleet is needing to be renewed, that potentially starts to manage that capacity and give a case over a longer period of time for those manufacturers to invest in more capacity to produce those. But again, that's probably in the more detailed post-board analysis that we look at. I think the paper does allude to a separate activity to really get into detail of the capacity of the operation, the marketplace to manufacture at scale that we would need in the north of England, which probably filters off of some of the work that UTG have recently been doing.
You've touched on electric buses, Steve. What about, can I ask about hydrogen buses? Because I think Edinburgh do them, Liverpool do them. I think Bradford are really keen on them. So what's the process for manufacturing and who does it? Hydrogen.
I think I don't have the answer to that question right now, but in terms of the actual vehicle types of this procurement, it's agnostic to sort of the fueling. And I think we would look at, in with the procurement of the fleet, the supporting infrastructure needed to maintain that type of fleet. So we've got conversations on EV later on. There is questions around capacity for EV if you were to move to an EV fleet. Likewise for hydrogen. I know we've done hydrogen visualizer work as well. So as part of this detailed work, it's how do we coalesce all of those different themes to answer that question.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Thanks, Chair. I think the first question for me, just to sort of be really clear on, is what is the ultimate objective of the exercise? Is it to try and drive economies of scale and get buses cheaper overall for the north? Is it about the transition to zero emissions? Is it about something to do with the pipeline and the sustainability of that? I think a bit of clarity around that could be helpful in terms of then figuring out what the right option is to take forward. And you'll forgive me if you feel that should come across in the paper, because I think I'm getting a little bit sort of knocked back and forth as we're going around the discussion, that I'm not quite clear exactly what the ultimate objective is. And then I think the other thing I'd be interested in is understanding how long it would actually take to implement some of these options, because it strikes me as you go up the tiers, it's going to take longer and longer to put it in place. But if something like transition to zero emissions vehicles or hydrogen or whatever is the ultimate priority, then sooner is better, surely, and waiting for a long time to put an option in place, and then start the exercise of procuring the buses, strikes me as potentially not being the right way. And I'm conscious that all of this fits in within all of the stuff that's going on, the BSIP funding, to in and around franchising, what's happening in various different places where franchising maybe isn't an option. And I wonder whether there's something more to be done around supporting some of the smaller operators in this kind of space to try and navigate what strikes me as an area of quite a lot of complexity. So I appreciate there's a number of different questions there, but I think it starts with what is the sort of the ultimate objective here? Are we really clear on that, of what this exercise is trying to achieve, and how long are each of these options ultimately going to take to bring to fruition, depending on which you take forward?
Councillor Ferguson, really great questions. So I'll try and sort of give a bit of an overview here, and apologies if it hadn't come through in the paper. TFN's a membership organisation, so we as an executive are here to support our constituent authorities, the political leaders from the MCAs and the LTAs. And I think one of the things that as a membership organisation we've got those powers devolved from national government that we're able to do is consider where it may be more effective and efficient to work at a pan-northern level, whether that's all authorities or some authorities. And I think, as Matt said at the beginning, in talking with some of the political leaders across the region in recent months, many of them are grappling with challenges around buses, whether it is franchising, whether it's BSIPs. And they said, actually, is there something here that might be helpful to do in terms of a collective as the North? So at this stage, we really have just tried to set out some of the ways that as TFN we could help facilitate if there was a need or a desire to collaborate around buses. So to give an example, if everyone's going out to procure buses and we've got one or two key providers of those, low emission buses, zero emission buses, we might actually have complexities with the supply chain and coordinating and being able to get delivery when people want it. So at this stage, it was more an opportunity to say to members around scrutiny first and then to the TFN board, is this something that you think you might like to work on together? Here are some of the ways that we could do that as TFN. The broader purpose and reason for doing it, though, really goes back to the strategic transport plan. And our focus now is we've set a plan as constituent authorities signed up to a plan that is 25 years. It's a long-term transport strategy of where we'd like transport to enable the growth of the economy, to do that sustainably and decarbonise, and to do that in an inclusive way. And what's come through very strongly in all the consultation that we did, going back to Councillor Healy's point about consultation, is local connectivity. That is clearly, MCAs and LTAs are far better placed to think about local connectivity. They know the people and places. But actually, in terms of implementing that STP, is there something that might help economies of scale, efficiencies, to be able to look at this as a collective across the north of England? So the drive is decarbonisation and the STP. The rationale is TFN has got those powers to potentially work together where members may want to. And really that was the purpose, to say, we've had the member feedback. Are these options here that might be helpful, from convening, which can be sharing advice, guidance, evidence to support work, to potentially the other end of the scale where there might want to be some sort of opportunity to actually collaborate together. Does that answer your question?
I think it does, because what you said there was decarbonisation. That was the thing you sort of focused on there, and so it strikes me that any option that you go for should ultimately be about, well, how do we drive forward that decarbonisation as quickly and efficiently as possible, and who particularly needs the support to get that decarbonisation right. And I think if decarbonisation is the goal, I feel a wee bit clearer in terms of my own mind about, you know, where I would be looking at in the options, just my personal view. But that's why I was sort of asking, like, are we clear? Because it's clearly that there are lots and lots of challenges. You could identify lots of things, and it's which is it that's really driving this piece forward. So it's decarbonisation. I think it needs to be something that we can move on pretty swiftly, actually, and look where there might be challenges for, you know, perhaps smaller operators that might struggle, because I think someone said earlier that the electric buses are potentially a little bit more expensive. There's a question around what is a question around what happens whenever you need to replace the batteries, which I think is ready to be made, and things like that, which might be a little bit easier to accommodate if you're naturally procuring larger volumes of buses anyway. So.
I think you're right, Councillor. There's the decarbonisation ambitions in there, but I think the other point that again came through for the work that we've done is the point about reducing transport-related social exclusion and being able to give people a bus service that's affordable, reliable. So actually the other element here, I think that's a really key driver, is some of the things we've already touched on in the earlier conversations about that local connectivity. It's the ability to get to a job, you know, to know the bus is going to turn up on time, and you're going to have the right ticket, and it's going to be affordable, and actually, you know, you can get to your place of work or to the GP. So I think it's across all three of those ambitions that we've got in the strategic transport plan. I appreciate the focus here being on the sort of the EV element, that actually then there's also the point here about driving decarbonisation. So I think we'll take that offline, perhaps just think how we can just clarify that in the paper. So it's really good to have your fresh eyes on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think one of the things that we might be referring to is the ultimate ambition here is about how we implement a strategic transport plan. But there's also a lot of co-benefits, and decarbonisation for you might be a main benefit, but it's also, in effect, it's a co-benefit because it's something can happen at the same time. It's a bit like, you know, I'll speak for myself on this, but I want to see a just transition to net zero, so everybody gets levelled up. So, and I would see that as a co-benefit, or maybe getting people to have more money in their pocket allows them to be more environmentally friendly, and therefore the environmental friendly becomes a co-benefit the other way around. It just depends how what your perspective is, I guess. Anyway, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was just a comment. I just wanted to express strong support for the next step outlined in 5.2, the benchmarking of the ability of the manufacturing base to meet the demand of the North's bus reform agenda, etc. So, we talk about the green jobs dividend, and I think seeing what particularly national manufacturers can produce, what their plans are for the years to come, I think would be very, very helpful, particularly to smaller local authorities that probably don't have the resources to go out and find that information for themselves.
Thank you. A very powerful point. Jill, please.
Yeah, you said that you were agnostic on fuel source, whether hydrogen or electric. I presume you're also looking at various sizes of bus, because if we're talking about social inclusion and the rural economy, then smaller buses are going to be quite significant in that, I think.
I think, given that we're still in the options phase, yes, there's questions around under, say, light support. If we're looking at standardisation of configuration, that would be chassis size, things like that, to particular place-based scenarios, but we're probably a little ahead of that detail now. Effectively, it's what is the appropriate fleet that authorities might want to bring to their markets, and what are some of the standardisations. I mean, there's questions around accessibility on them as well, if we can get standardised approaches to audio-visual, but that's probably a little bit ahead of where we are in the options appraisal at the moment, but absolutely there would be a need to be reflective of the physical geographies at place.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Chairman. I also wanted to sort of come back on this agnostic on fuel sources point. I do feel that as a committee we've often discussed, in terms of discussing decarbonisation, we've often made the point that hydrogen could well be a very important part of that transition. And I may be being harsh, but it does feel that sometimes we just get warm words that, oh yes, it will play a part for larger vehicles, and oh, there's a trial going on here or there, but nothing more substantive than that. I feel personally that it really is important to explore it. Clearly, if on going into the details, there aren't affordable, workable, reliable hydrogen options, then that sort of can't be taken any further. But I would quite strongly feel, and I don't know whether other committee members feel this as well, but to me, I think that there should be a sort of ask that when these sort of environmentally friendly options are being looked into, that hydrogen is at least fully explored, and that if it is possible to bring a good value workable hydrogen option as well as electric options, then I think that should be done. And if it's not workable, it's not workable, but at least I would like the work to be done to sort of see if that can be brought forward.
Just to pick up on that, Councillor, we've deliberately talked about alternative fuels. I think, as Matt said, the agnostic point. We've been leading some work with the Northern Gas Networks on a hydrogen refuelling visualiser to understand where the opportunities might be for heavy goods vehicles in terms of using hydrogen as a source for refuelling. That's now available on our website. But I just wonder if I might take your point, even in relation to our last paper that we took on business planning, that sounds like an area of work perhaps you're saying could be important to do further analysis and evidence and thinking about what the case may be for that, that option for refuelling, not just for HGVs but for other vehicles as well. So I'll take that point away, if I may, under business planning too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions on this item or comments? Okay, well, look, I'll summarise. I think the issue just on Matt's last point was, in actual fact, we have a limiter on, the grid is very much a limiter on, and I think also the hydrogen production is also, so in actual fact, I think potentially it's a little bit about the supply chain and the infrastructure providing the fuel that's perhaps the issue at this stage of the game. If I were to summarise the committee's views on Matt's paper, is essentially A, we like it, B, we've wanted to add a few bits to it, and C, why haven't you already finished it? I think because I think people have commented on the fact that this is urgent, and you know, Steve's already bought his 110 buses, and he might have been able to get him a discount. Is that summary reasonable, gentlemen and ladies? Thank you. Are you okay, Matt?
I am, yes, thank you everyone.
Right, I shall now move us to the next item, which is electric vehicles charging state of play report, which is a bit of a mouthful.
Sorry, Chair. Have we done buses or other items?
No, we've just done item 7. We did item 6.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay, Rod, don't worry. You contributed to the right one earlier, so don't worry.
Committee, if I may apologise, I think because we sent some of the papers were to follow, there may have just been a slight discrepancy. So if I can just confirm, we have taken the item on the Scrutiny Committee work, we've taken the business planning item, we've just taken the options on the regional fleet procurement support, and we're about to move on to electric vehicle charging. But I think there is a discrepancy in that on the original agenda it was this next item was 8. And on the updated one, it went through as 7. So our apologies. I think there's just been a glitch somewhere in our modern gov system that we need to just pick up. So please forgive us.
It was the business item one I wanted to speak on, actually, so I missed that one.
That was the one we took immediately after the committee's report. So I'll look to the chair as to what you'd like to do there.
Rod, would you like to just make your comment now then, before I move us on to the next one?
Very helpful point, Councillor. We have put it into our work programme in Appendix 5 because we actually recognise that this was the ambition that the TFN board agreed to in March. It is slightly different from the national target. I think actually if you crunch the numbers, and I can double check this with the team, it's more ambitious. The North is saying it wants to be more ambitious. But in the conversation that we had in finalising that strategic transport plan, we said, yes, we want to be more ambitious in terms of rail freight's share of transportation, but actually we are still struggling with capacity on our network and we highlighted the West Coast Main Line and that corridor as an issue within the Strategic Transport Plan, noting, of course, the previous government's decision around connectivity beyond Birmingham and up to Manchester. So one of the things that we've now said is the STPs, again, it's that ambition, that long-term strategy. How are we going to get there? So we've been beginning work, and we expect this to continue into next year, to identify what the interventions and investment is going to be needed to ensure we've got the capacity, the capability and the regulatory environment that will get more rail freight in line with that target. So that's in our plan for next year. So it's really helpful to have your support for that work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for bearing with me, Chair.
Rod, I think that's a very, very important point, and I'd ask Gary that he minutes the fact that we need to be conscious of the impact of the withdrawal of HS2, the northern leg, in terms of its impact on freight. And the potential to achieve our goals and what other interventions might be required.
Well, I think part of it is that 2A is very cheap compared to the parts being built, and also 2B because of all the tunnelling involved in 2B. So 2A is quite cheap compared to the rest of HS2 that was proposed. So I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Steve.
I thought it might come up under any other business, but you might want to say further, but did I hear you right earlier that HS2, there was some further consideration, because just echoing that, HS2A is a relatively cheap thing, which is why the Higgins report suggested it should be done as part of HS1. So I did just wonder whether, despite all the spending constraints, there might be some murmurings that it still looks good value for money compared to HS2 bit, the HS1, HS2, the first bit.
Yes.
It's still, HS2A was part of it. Yeah, it was part of the first bit, made it part of the first bit. That's right. Yeah. So I did just wonder whether there were murmurings.
Okay, well, look, I don't know about that, but I am going to ask Gary just a minute the fact that HS2A, according to some of our experts on the committee, would actually be good, is better value for money and should perhaps appear in some, maybe if it's not even under that guise of HS2A, but has a different name, the Steve Rod line or whatever. Yeah, but yeah, freight too. But it's important, and there is an opportunity there. So thank you for that. Can I now move on to whether, depending on which, because I've now got both in front of me. So depending on which agenda you've got in front, it will either be item 7 or item 8. Am I allowed to move forward? Yes, thank you. So this is a very important paper in terms of the state of the nation, as far as, or the state of the northern part of the nation, on EV chargers. Not wishing to steal anybody's thunder, but I believe there has to be a 12-fold increase in order to achieve our 2030 goals. But I'll leave Simon to the rest of that. So thank you. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the purpose of this item is to provide you with an update on our work around electric vehicles and associated charging infrastructure, which is either delivering or supporting key elements of our business plan for this year. If I take the same approach as Matt, I'll summarise the board paper briefly and then open up to your steers, if that's okay. So first up, section 3 gives you a bit of background in terms of the context that this work stream is set in. So we've already touched on it today, but it's very much set within the strategic transport plan that we have at TFN, the metrics around increased public transport, increased active travel, and a zero mileage increase of vehicles by 2045. However, the transition to EV remains a key one part of the solution, as the Chair put it, for transport decarbonisation. So that's section 3. Section 4 then moves on to give you a bit of a snapshot of where we are at the moment as the region, both in terms of EV uptake and charging infrastructure. As you can see from the stats in the paper, there has been a significant move in the last 2 or 3 years, but there is a way to go to reach the vision that we have within the STP for decarbonisation of our transport networks. And the stats that are used in that report are taken from TFN Analytics. We do plan to do a report like this on an annual basis to monitor how the progress is going against where we need to be. But those analytics remain on hand to local authorities and TFN itself throughout the year. Section 5 then moves on to give you a bit of a run through about what we've been up to in terms of supporting and enabling planning and delivery across the region. So sections 5.1 to 5.4 summarise the EV charging infrastructure framework. So this is our analytics and evidence base that is actively used by local authorities and Mayo combined authorities. It's openly available, it's free to access, and we support it via the TFN offer that Katie's mentioned today as well. It's also publicly available, so it does a really nice job of encouraging investment and charge point operators into the region, and also allows us to collaborate with wider stakeholders who have a bit of a role to play in this infrastructure. The paper summarises some of the upgrades that we're seeking to publish later this year, alongside the State of Play report, which you've also got, and that focuses on areas around energy, spatial aspects, commercial viability, all of which have a useful application within local authorities' delivery at the moment. Really pleased also to say that we've now rolled this toolkit out nationally across England, so all local authorities now across England have access to this toolkit, and that was on request of the Department for Transport. And it's a toolkit that we can mould and shape as we go. We continuously look for areas of added value, and we work with the local authorities to choose which ones to move forward with. And we might look at things like buses in the future and work with Matt, or freight as another example of where we could work across TFN and bring in some of those strengths. Section 5.5 and 5.6 summarise some of the engagement activity that TFN undertake, the collaboration, the advocacy. You've got all that summarised in the material, so I won't go into that. But just to flag that recently we supported local authorities with some advice up to the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles regarding the Levi funding, which is the national funding that all local authorities have access to encourage delivery. And we worked with the local authorities there to bring together the challenges that they were facing, really live challenges, and advise some of the new ministers' decisions in the department around best delivery of that scheme. And then the last section, section 5.7 to 5.12, gives you a summary of the State of Play report, which we'd like to publish with your endorsement. Appendix 4 also has a draft of this State of Play report, and that's been worked through with the TFN partnership to really take stock of where we are, learn the lessons and experiences that we have to date, and pinpoint the activities that we think need focus moving forward to get us to where we need to be. So really, this is about unlocking some of the barriers, the challenges, and also showing the importance of breaking down the silos and working cross-sector. So to the point about hydrogen earlier on, our work around systems planning with the energy sector is really key here, working across infrastructure to make sure that we get the best delivery. But we've also opened that up to spatial, digital and skills as well. So really, we're looking for your support, really, your endorsement of the report that's attached. We welcome any thoughts on the delivery aspects that we've done to date, anything you'd like to see more of. But with your endorsement, we'll firm up the draft report that we have and seek to take that to TFN board. I'll stop there, Chair, and open to any steers from the committee.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's open to questions now. Thank you. Please, John.
Yeah, it's interesting, given that EV sales have gone in reverse at the moment, and how that plays into the strategy, and it's quite a complex number of reasons, but a lot of the people I know that have EVs are company drivers, and they've switched. When I had company cars for many years, obviously they were all Euro 5 or 6 diesels. After I'd left, everyone had turned their BMWs into EVs because of the tax regime, which is now coming to an end. So, a little bit of a worry there. I mean, I've stuck with diesel, I have to be honest, because I'm not convinced that the infrastructure, as I travel 200 or 300 miles down the country, is going to be there to actually get me there without a lot of stress. In terms of, will there be a charging station? Will there be a fight to get to the actual thing itself? I know that a lot of garages have, a lot of service areas have had to employ security because of brawls. And the other interesting fact is, of course, that a lot of these fast, rapid charging stations are powered by diesel generators because the grid can't supply the power. And as we move to all this wonderful charging infrastructure, is the grid going to support it? Will David Miliband's windmills and pylons that are going to crisscross the country ever happen? So there's a lot of challenge really, and I'm not sure that this really reflects the current situation that we're in. And especially the targets, the dates for all this to happen, I just don't think are realistic at all. In terms of the issues we've had with the funding from the government, in terms of finding public space to put the charging in car parks and various other areas, the recent issue we've had is how do we service EV owners that live in terraced streets, where the only parking they have is on street. So we've had a big debate about which lamp posts we put them on, and one of the things that doesn't seem to have really been taken cognizance is the fact that people who live in terraced houses, and there's lots of them across a lot of our authorities, that little bit of street in front of their house is theirs. All right, and God forbid anybody that parks in front of their front door. All the charging infrastructure is on the web. Anybody can park. It's not basically that bit of street isn't yours. In reality, so we've had to shift a lot of them away because without local knowledge, where do you put these? Now, given the amount of people that live in this type of accommodation that haven't got a nice drive where they can stick a nice cheap charging point on the sides of the house, they're going to be stuck with public charging points where it's astronomical charges. So you add all this together, you can understand why EVs are going into reverse. And does this report really reflect, in terms of the timescales for decarbonisation, the reality of where we're at? And as Councillor Slater has said, hydrogen is an important element, because hydrogen fuel technology exists now, what doesn't exist is the transmission and perhaps the capacity to generate the stuff, whether it's green, blue or whatever. But, when you think where we were not many years ago, when the gasoline engine was introduced, and you look at the distribution network that we've basically created within 50 years, it's not beyond the realms of fantasy that we can put in a hydrogen network where people that really can't get access to EVs, and I think the point's made is it's going to be two-tier, hopefully. HGVs and trains will not run on batteries. Batteries will be the size of the train, wouldn't they? So it's a great report. I'm just questioning whether it needs updating. Thank you.
Councillor John Healy, please.
Can I just add to that, Chair, as well? And I think it's very valid what Councillor John Davison has said. But I was talking to a colleague of mine very recently, ex-soldier actually, blown up with IED. So he's in a wheelchair, and of course he has a motor vehicle. It's a van in actual fact, all electric. And he complains that he can't go very far because he can't utilise the public access to an EV station. He did explain why, forgive me, I've forgotten because I've slept since then. But what I was wondering was whether or not, and it wouldn't necessarily come to us, but by the producers or even the public spaces, so local councils that are using them, have complaints come in from disabled. Now, I'm not appreciating the whole scheme of things. They're a small number of people. But nevertheless, if we're encouraging people to go electric, they need to be able to have access reasonably. And the one thing I will state is, because of his disability, he cannot get out the wheelchair. His whole wheelchair has been produced for him specifically. Fortunately, MOD's paid for that, so he didn't have to pay for it. So it's a bit different for a lot of people. But nevertheless, I do have a concern in the terms of pushing forward, whether or not we're excluding people inadvertently, not realising that we are doing.
Thank you very much. Just before, I'll just need to take a question from Colin, and then we'll let you have a go, sir.
Thanks, Chair. whenever I read the draft report, one of the things that caught my eye was the projected increase in the total number of vehicles on the road network, up to about 10.6 million, if memory serves, by 2030. And I think it's already been mentioned briefly, the intention to have zero overall regional increase in car and taxi vehicle mileage that came out in one of the other agenda items. And I was trying to sort of square those two figures off in my head, because that seems to imply to me that what we're saying is more cars doing shorter journeys more frequently over time. And so that then posed the question to me around, well, how does all of this sit against some of the other aspirations that we've been talking about in terms of public transport? And that then made me look at the recommendations in a particular way. We're talking about all modes of transport and all of this kind of thing. So I guess I just want to understand a little bit about how the modelling is informing what we think car usage is going to look like, and how any of the work that we do around electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which, to be clear, I think is absolutely the right thing to be, building up. I've got no question about that. But it's about how we do that in a way that sits well alongside the broader aspirations that have been mentioned earlier in the meeting around the sustainable transport piece, so that we don't end up just baking in a different type of car usage and be sitting here in 5-10 years' time saying, oh, we need more people on the buses.
Thank you very much. Just before I hand over to Sam, are there any more questions? Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think what we're seeing at the moment, in some ways, is a time lag, because the technology is improving all the time. So why would you buy an EV with a range of 300 miles this year, when in 2 years' time that could well have a range of 500 or 600 miles? So I think we're seeing a time lag, but I'm just wondering how that's impacting in terms of confidence of investment. So it says here that we're looking at an estimated £3.9 billion of investment required to 2030. So I'm just wondering, are there any indications at the moment where that investment is going to come from, and what will be the deciding factors in whether that investment is released or not?
Okay. And Councillor Matt, please.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right, one thing I wanted to mention briefly, I've mentioned it at a previous meeting on this sort of topic, but Lancashire County Council, it was probably a couple of years ago now, had a sort of trial of installing charging points for people who live in terrace properties. They did find some challenges. There's clearly the issue that you don't own the pavement, and you don't own the parking space outside of your house. And so there were difficulties there, and I think they were creating grooves to sort of get the cable through. Again, are there kind of legal issues there? I did sort of mention it. I don't know whether I don't know whether anyone from TFN has gone to LCC and sort of had a conversation with them about that scheme. It does strike me that sort of measure is something that would have to be looked at, in terms of people from terrace properties have to have access to electric vehicles, and that's quite morally important, and it's part of making this feasible. I also wanted to sort of ask about a couple of the recommendations on Appendix 3. So in terms of the draft recommendations, I'm very happy with all the recommendations from 3 onwards, but for recommendation 1, which was about sort of financial support, possibly for, I guess, people to buy second-hand vehicles, there was a little bit of a concern when I read that if other regions in the country were to put in place similar measures, or other local authorities, you could just have essentially lots of money chasing the same pool of second-hand cars, and it could end up sort of increasing the cost of those cars, but not necessarily getting more electric vehicles into the pool of usability. So it might cost money without actually achieving much good. I don't know, that's a worry, and something I think to think about. Maybe there needs to be more analysis before pushing forward with that. In terms of recommendation 2, which was about countering misinformation, I was a little bit perplexed, and I'm wondering, what misinformation is there, and what information barriers do we think exist that are causing people not to adopt electric vehicles? I think my assumption at this point in time is that some people may be wary of electric vehicles because of the cost of purchasing them, or that they're concerned about, you know, how easy it will be to charge. I would have thought those are real issues, and those are real issues that, you know, can and hopefully will be tackled. But I don't know, maybe there was lots of misinformation I'm not aware of, but perhaps some information on that would be interesting if we are going to support recommendation 2.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Just hang on. There's one more question, I believe, and then you can deliver all your answers, hopefully. By the way, there's a lot of misinformation circling. It just might not be getting to you because you might have a truth monitor on, but somebody came up to me the other day and said that they felt wind turbines would only last 7 years. So you know, and they were convinced they were right. And as they were bigger than me, I didn't try and argue. However, Councillor Firth, please.
It's a comment on the question, Chair. I'd just like to follow up what you're saying about technology. Technology is changing at a pace. Now the Japanese have invented a 2-litre hydrogen engine, which can be fitted in cars. And who knows, next year there might be a 1-litre engine that can fit in cars. We've discussed this at our authority about just be careful what you wish for, because you can't be plunging headlong into investing in today's technology when things are happening all the time because of pressure worldwide, because of the climate change issues and the particulates in the air. So just be so careful of investing in present day technology because we don't know what's around the corner.
Thank you very much. Simon, I think I've counted, I don't know, about 63 questions for you to answer.
Okay, well, I'll try and get through as many as possible then. I'll try and take them in turn. So I think you very nicely summarised why we have a lot of the recommendations in the report. So I agree, fleets is a vital one for us right now, and that's where you'll see the move to EV perhaps first, and then that can encourage a second-hand market because those cars are used, and then we drive the second car market cost down, and that gets more access, more equitable access, hopefully for users going forward. On the education piece, and I think the recommendation too, sorry, I'll crisscross a little bit, but it's probably more education than myth busting, and it's education right from the manufacturing point through to the sales people who are telling, you know, the user how they're going to charge, how long is the battery going to last, and giving confidence that way. And then it's education through to ourselves, the users, because this is a massive behavioural change for us all, to make sure that we have the right information. And there is a lot of different information out there in the public domain. And we feel with that recommendation, we can get people on the same page a bit more with this, around battery life, how the technology works in the winter months, whether a second-hand battery lasts as long as it needs to, which the evidence is proving that it can do. So I think education is really key for us in here. In terms of the targets, yeah, they look, on paper, they look quite challenging. What we set out is quite similar to the Committee on Climate Change, so we're kind of in train with them on that. Although there's a lot to be done there. If I talk, sorry, Councillor Ferguson, you talked about targets as well. The way it all works within TFN, and Katie mentioned the future travel scenarios earlier on, which we also lead on. So it's very much informed by the travel scenarios, which looks at different population behaviours, different technology uptake. So we have different rates of hydrogen EV technology take-up across these scenarios, and then different mode demand shifts across there as well. So that's all baked in behind this. All of the EV outputs that you see in our modelling are provided across those future travel scenarios. We work very closely with the decarbonisation team, so that the targets that you've seen are in tune with the strategy that we've agreed across TFN and the partnership. In terms of energy and terraced, I think this is the place where we can make the most difference actually with the evidence that we've built. We've done some really innovative things around energy. We were working with the electricity partners, the distribution network operators and Ofgem to combine what we think we need for the region and compare that to what electricity capacity that we have on the grid now. And some of the work that you'll see as pump out as part of this gives you that picture through the next 5, 10, 15 years of where those constraints are going to be on the grid right across the region. So that's really powerful stuff. The other one, someone mentioned terraced. Again, really key that we have equity in delivery here. So you'll see in the report there are policy recommendations to reduce the VAT cost of public charging, because at the moment, public charging is a lot more costly than charging at home. Not everyone has a driveway. So we're recommending policy action there. On the evidence side, we've also done some really innovative stuff where we've mapped across the whole of the region where driveways are available and where they're not. And we're making that accessible to local authorities now to put to use. And that shapes local action then in terms of what you might do in your areas to get the best solution there. I'm trying to get through it. Mobility, inclusivity was mentioned. That's really key. So you'll see that one of the recommendations is that the PAS 1899 mobility guidance, which is just guidance at the moment, but the recommendation in here is that that's made a legally binding aspect. And I think that there's traction within the transport industry to do that. And it's the right way to go to get access to everyone. Like you say, cables are heavy, they're not at the right level, and the bay sizes are somewhat not there as well. So really important, and we wanted to focus on inclusivity really strongly in this report. I think I'm almost making my way through. Confidence in investment. So I think the manufacturers are bought in. The response when the previous government sought to move the ban of combustion vehicles back to 2035, the response from the manufacturers was, well, we're cracking on with this. We actually want to deliver the EVs or zero emissions earlier than that. So I think it's a positive step from the new government. There seems to be noises that 2030 is on the cards, and that drives a bit of confidence in the manufacturing industry. On the charging side, the Levi programme, the government funding that I mentioned before, is driving a lot of interest in the region. Local authorities are very busy working on these programmes, but we're seeing lots of charge point operators keen to get involved and get their machinery in the ground, if you like. So I think that confidence is there, and we're somewhat at a tipping point here in time where everyone's perhaps over the next few years, you see that confidence develop further. Recommendation 1, yes, I think we could look into the detail of that a bit more in terms of how that plays through and what that does to the market. I think it's a really useful point, so we'll take that on board. Thank you. The mention about parking spaces, yes, again, I think there is some national guidance in the works in terms of cross-pavement solutions, because it does draw out a lot of new questions about the Planning and Highways Acts and how they're enforced and who has liability. Again, we mentioned that in the report, that is an area that needs work moving forward. I think I might have covered most of it, Chair, but I'm open to anyone to suggest I need to add a bit more detail.
Is theft and vandalism of the cables, and how we're going to manage that, because that's unfortunately, whether it's stealing a cable because people think there's value in it, like a bit of copper, or just people walking by think it'd be a wheeze to rip them out and throw them over a hedge, also happens. So I think it's something that's just not in the report. That's all. That's an issue, unless I've missed it, of course.
Sorry. Recommendation 5 is theft, vandalism and safety considerations are embedded and where possible funded within charge point delivery. So it's something that our local authorities have raised really actively, actually, that, yeah. And again, that comes back to the confidence in use and the education of whether people want to buy an EV and go down that route. Thank you.
Councillor Connor, please.
Yeah, sorry, it's just a point of clarification. It's just in regards to what Councillor Davison said earlier on. It's in regards to when you go onto this. Did you say when you go onto the service stations? Sometimes they've got they get charged up the charging point is actually done by a diesel.
Diesel generator.
Diesel generator.
What they call the rapid chargers.
Yeah. Is there any cost analysis for that? Is that worth doing? You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's important to state that the public charging regs set out that 99% of rapid chargers need to be reliable, and that's backed up by punishments if they're not. So I think, however it's charged, that charger needs to be available on the point of someone coming to use it. Now we'd actually suggest that in the future we need to consider non-rapid charging in that as well, so that everyone has the comfort that when you go to these charge points, they're there, because that's what we're used to with petrol stations at the moment, isn't it? We're used to drive up, plug in and go. Sorry,
I'm talking about the cost.
Sorry, yes.
It's the cost and obviously the environmental, because if you're still using diesel to get the electric, well, what's the point?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I didn't take that point. If I point you to one of the recommendations at the back of the report, it refers to sustainability and grid decarbonisation. So again, we'd agree with that point that the fuel needs to be coming from a renewable source where possible, whether that's generated on site, so solar power, wind, or through renewable grid connectivity.
Did I have... you're the last questioner on this item, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say very briefly, I was pleased with what I'd heard on recommendation 2. Could I request that it might be rephrased to focus on education? I just think that would be helpful to prevent misunderstandings.
Thank you. I'll just summarise, and then I think Katie wishes to say something. So I'm getting 3 flavours coming from you guys. The first one is, and the first thing is, I must say that there's always a danger in this world that we have perfect inaction, and unfortunately we need to have imperfect action, and we won't always get it right. So first one is we need to effectively sign off all the recommendations if we choose to. I take the point about education, and I think that we would ask Sam to take that away and clarify it as education. I think misinformation sometimes is a bit inflammatory, so I think education is a much better terminology. The other thing that I think is the item about is really that all EVs should be powered by, I think it must be by renewable source, rather than an option to, and I don't know how that fits in legally, but I do think that that's something that I'm also getting from the committee here. In terms of, I've got what I've labelled as 2A and 2B, is that one, we would ask that you have an horizon, or you scanning the horizon continually on technological development and how that impacts on your, so whether you have an annual review of the paper or a process in which you can take your paper and then just compare to what's happening on the ground or what you see as happening in the future. And the other side of it, and just taking Councillor Ferguson's point, is I also think that you need to be taking cognizance of what we'll call the travel scenarios. So, for example, in North Yorkshire, as I mentioned, if the new planning rules come in, instead of having 20,000 houses built in the next about somewhere between 20 and 30,000 houses built in the next 20 years, we have 80,000 houses built in the next 20 years, then that is obviously going to create within the country migrations of population. So have I caught that all, committee, please?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add a couple of other points, if I may, because one of the helpful points taking this paper in the same session that we've talked about business planning is your feedback here helps us work out what we focus on next. I think, as the Chair said, the report is a point in time, and I think Councillor Davison, does it need updating? It does, it will do, but I think what we want to do is try and draw it as a line in sand, a point in time, because as we know, you write something one day and it inherently is out of date with the context change. So I think making sure that we draw a line underneath it and then keep focused on progress and where we are with it. And again, our monitoring and evaluation framework around the strategic transport plan will help us do that. I think the other thing that's come out really strongly today is the point about just transition. So actually decarbonisation that includes people and doesn't disadvantage. So I think perhaps to just reassure the committee that the work that we're doing to do a bit of a stock take of the regional transport decarbonisation strategy over the course of this year and into the early part of next is looking at just that, to make sure that that we actually don't create more inequalities through decarbonisation transition. We want it to be a place for opportunity and to bring more people into society. And I think the final point I will just suggest that I'm going to ask the team to take offline if we can. I think Councillor Ferguson's point around our right share metric and ambition vis-a-vis the data that we're using here, which is actually suggesting there's an increase in car use. We need to just square that in terms of a very clear public line. So I'm going to take that point away and ask the team to just help us work on that one. But thank you very much for your feedback. We will take those away and make sure that they are used as part of the business planning process as well.
Thank you. So, committee, does everybody here agree that all the recommendations that are listed in this paper can go forward? All right. Okay, does anybody object? No. I think, therefore, Simon, you can take that forward. Thank you. It isn't actually on the agenda, but I would just say, is there anything else that we've missed today that anybody would like to bring up at all? Councillor Salter.
I don't want to sort of delay the meeting at all, but sometimes in past meetings we have sort of just asked for a bit of the context of what the government and how the government's thinking has changed. Maybe this is too early, and it probably is. So I'm more sort of saying for the next meeting it might be useful to sort of have a understanding of what discussions have been had with the new government, how their thinking might be changing, and therefore what opportunities there might be for us to engage with that, lobby, adjust our plans, whatever.
I think your observation that it's still very early days is really spot on. Perhaps just a couple of comments. I think it's been made really, really clear the power of devolution and the drive for devolution from the new government. That very much aligns with what we've talked about in the strategic transport plan about putting the decisions and the funding closer to the people and the places that they affect. So I think for TFN, as we've tried to bring across in the business planning paper, it's how we support and enable those MCAs and LTAs to do the great work that they're doing for our communities and for our businesses. It won't surprise you, we have provided an introductory letter to the new Secretary of State. Although not so new now, a couple of months in, but we provided her with a copy of our strategic transport plan, and we've invited her to join, subject to her diary, either a Rail North committee, but certainly a TFN board meeting to come and have the opportunity to talk to members. And she's acknowledged receipt of that, and we hope we might be able to see her at a future meeting. The offer's been made to her, and as part of that, in sharing the strategic transport plan, we've asked that as TFN's statutory advice to government, principal statutory advice is taken into consideration as decisions are made around investment, etc. And as I said, it now is our pivot to how we implement and deliver that plan. But I think probably councils ought to have a really good suggestion to perhaps have a further discussion when perhaps future policy where things have got to will be a little bit clearer. I'm conscious they only came back from recess on Monday. So thank you. We'll take that for the next meeting.
Any other points, questions? Okay, so one of the reasons we actually sent the Jürgen Meyer report out was to give a context of what we knew to date. The other thing is that in the both parties that were leading the general election, both were very committed to devolution. So whichever party won the event, the devolution was never going to be reversed. It might be accelerated and some of the form might change. And I think it's particularly timely that we're talking about buses today, because I think that is going to be a significant change. So the next meeting will be online and will be on the 21st of November. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you.